There are so many ancient vectors that point to Upper Mesopotamia, to the Ararat region, and say that is where human civilization received its reboot. While I was there, I got drawn into the world of symbols, the carvings left behind by the Biainili. They were the people who lived in what is now Turkey and Armenia in the Bronze Age. They left behind the remains of their citadels, also the cuneiform inscriptions at those places, and these intriguing symbols. It was into the world of those symbols that I got drawn. The stories of the Biainili go further than a rough idea that there was some kind of a catastrophe and a recovery here. They go into detail as to what that was, how we recovered, and who it was that helped us. What I discovered in the world of Biainili symbology is what I've laid out in the book, The Eden Enigma. In the Eden Enigma, I stay mainly in the one place because I really want to drill down into the wisdom that's there. How does a wisdom and a body of knowledge that seem to be an international understanding of our human history and our planetary history, how does that relate to our contemporary understanding of human evolution, the development of the planet? The Biainili, the people of Urartu, they spoke of a time when a group of beings called the DIGIR lived among their ancestors for a finite period, and they had advanced capabilities, but finite, limited capabilities. Those capabilities had a lot to do with environmental repair post-cataclysm and relaunching agriculture and thereby civilization post-cataclysm. They didn't worship these beings in the sense that we might think of the worship of the gods, and often when we tell other cultures' stories, we describe the advanced figures in their stories as gods. But when we use the word God, we distort what they're talking about, because in our mind, a god is a supernatural, transcendent, probably imagined being. That wasn't what the Biainili meant at all. They were finite beings who lived at a particular time for a finite time among their ancestors, and that period was remembered with great affection. They remembered their ancestors speaking about meher kapi, bright doorways. These doorways relate to that feeling towards the DIGIR, because what the Bronze Age Biainili wanted was for the DIGIR to return. I'd visited something called a meher kapi in the city of Van, which is an incredible carved doorway, a triple inset doorway, halfway up a cliff, carved into limestone. And the hope was that the DIGIR and Haldi, their chief, would return through one of these doorways. And all the Urartian kings, the Biainili kings, boasted that they had created this citadel, and they'd also created a doorway for Haldi to return. And they called it a meher kapi because they remembered that it was always a bright doorway that the DIGIR returned through. They had ceremonial ways of remembering the DIGIR, but they were also wanting to create the conditions by which the DIGIR could return and share some more technology with them. I find so many ancient stories point to us being part of a wider cosmic family, and a story that says we wouldn't be here were it not for assistance from our cosmic family. Now, I think the worldview that emerges from that is very different from the one you or I may have been taught in school. That's one of my motivations, to unravel some of that, to get us back into a more positive relationship with the cosmos, to know how valuable we are, to know how closely help has been on hand in the past, so that we might look to the future with a little bit more imagination and confidence. That's a big part of the story told by the Biainili. The other main part of their story is to do with the curation of the environment. In the 1960s, Rachel Carson warned about the use of DDT in modern agriculture. We were going down a path that would not only end up poisoning all the birds, because that was what was happening in the 1960s. Birds were beginning to go missing. The animals who ate them were dying. We were poisoning the whole food chain. And she warned of a silent spring. Now, the Biainili story speaks directly to that, because their story begins with a silent spring. This was an existential threat to them, their ancestors, and to all of humanity. Their story is we only got through it that time because of external help, but those who came to help us taught us things about agriculture that potentially can save us again and again and again when different kinds of threats come against our ecosystem. We have been given the tools to respond to this. That was the hopeful message I found in many of the carvings across Turkey and Armenia. I think we have an idea that our ancestors invented gods for every natural phenomenon, and we tend to read every ancient story through that lens. But again, I think that distorts what we're actually hearing from each different group. What I hear in the story of the Biainili is that there were issues to do with the weather that had put them into a really perilous situation, and they needed beings who had better technology for managing what had happened and helping them to recover from it. And so when we've got DIGIR associated with the skies and the weather and the sun and the moon, I hear them within that context, which is ultimately a story of agriculture. Every indigenous culture has a story about help with agriculture. Not in the sense of, oh, we hope there's going to be a successful harvest this year, so we're going to make offerings to this being. No, the stories that I find repeating around the world are stories that say, there was a time when our ancestors didn't know how to cultivate crops with density sufficient to support cities, but non-human others came and taught us. There was a time when we didn't know what was good to eat and what was good to avoid. We learnt this from non-human others. You can hear this in Africa, Aboriginal Australia, in the Nordic countries, and you can certainly hear it at this pivot place on planet Earth, the place where the sun rises again, Anatolia. The name Anatolia means the place where the sun rises again. And that's really the deep story of that territory. Theistic religions have been exported with the invasion of other people's countries and colonization of other people's territory, and we've tended to delete and replace the old stories with Muslim orthodoxy or Christian orthodoxy. So there is a marginalization of those stories. They haven't disappeared, they're there to be rediscovered. In all my books in the Eden series, I go around listening to those stories and giving them a respectful hearing, because in the overlaps I find the deep story of the human race on planet Earth. That's the Urartian account of the DIGIR. And so when anthropologists and archaeologists say, oh, the DIGIR were the gods of the Urartian people, no, they weren't. They were the DIGIR, who were finite beings with finite powers who lived here for a finite time doing particular things. But because they're associated with the weather, very often that reductive thinking clicks in and we think, oh, a god of the weather, oh, a god of the sun. But I note that the DIGIR were limited in their powers. They weren't powerful enough to prevent the chaos of an ecological cataclysm. But they did have the technology, the agricultural science, to help the Urartians' ancestors recover after that cataclysm. The cover of my latest book, The Eden Enigma, shows what the DIGIR looked like. This is in fact an Assyrian carving of what anthropologists call a genie, a person with advanced powers that we can't explain. The same kind of being the Urartians referred to as DIGIR. And this is the way they were recalled with the pine cone and bucket in hand. I think that when we want to dig deeper into ancestral story, into what our ancestors wanted to tell us about the origins of humanity, the origins of the cosmos, how our planet reached the form we're all familiar with today, I think we should not settle for a single story. And I think there's a temptation to embrace the familiar stories and then put the unfamiliar ones on the back burner. Whereas those unfamiliar stories may simply be looking at things from a different angle. And that's why I think it can be unhelpful to try and treat it like a jigsaw where you're trying to fit all these different narratives together to make a single picture. In which case, is Thor Zeus? Is Yahweh Enlil? Are the feathered serpents of China Enki and Ninmah? Is Odin the same as Haldi? No, they're different stories, they're different cultures who have had a different vantage point and are sharing different memories. They may overlap. They may be giving us similar information, but they're not necessarily telling us all about the same particular beings. I find it helpful to see each story as a new lens, bringing different things into focus. I think a single story is going to distort the complexities of what happened in the deep past and the complexities of the stories left behind. But each new lens brings into focus something different. If I think of the optician layering one lens in front of another in that little device and saying better with or without, my answer is always better with.